A judge known for harsh sentences against minorities ruled severely against a respected black mother, unaware her son is the newly appointed district attorney building a case against him. When corruption and bias are exposed, careers and lives hang in the balance. Ambrose Jenkins must choose between duty and loyalty, knowing his actions could change everything. Margaret Jenkins, with her wise eyes that seemed to hold the stories of generations and a warm, reassuring smile, was more than just a member of her community. She was its heart. From the time she was young, Margaret dedicated herself to helping others. She started by volunteering at the local library, where she held free reading classes for children whose families couldn't afford tutors. Those early efforts blossomed into larger initiatives, organizing charity events, arranging food drives, and coordinating support for families going through hard times. Margaret's strong hands, worn from years of tireless work, were known for their dual nature: the firm, capable grasp that moved boxes at food banks and the gentle touch that could soothe a crying child or offer silent encouragement to a neighbor in need. Her determination was well known and respected. Margaret had a signature look that included brightly colored headscarves, each one tied with a sense of pride and purpose. When she walked into community meetings, she came armed with a well-used notebook and a reliable pen, ready to jot down any issues or new ideas that might help the neighborhood thrive. Her deep, confident voice, carrying a touch of her southern roots, commanded attention at rallies and gatherings. Margaret didn't just talk about problems. She spoke of solutions, inspiring those around her to believe in change and to act as a united force. She had an uncanny ability to uplift people, even during the most challenging conversations, leaving them with hope and determination. The fruits of her labor became visible as new projects began to flourish. A youth center that kept kids off the streets, after-school programs filled with laughter and learning, and initiatives that supported the elderly, ensuring they felt valued and cared for. Margaret's tireless efforts brought results where others had only seen obstacles. Her name became synonymous with integrity, compassion, and success. So, when accusations of financial misconduct surfaced, the shockwave was immediate and profound. It wasn't just Margaret who felt the sting of betrayal. It was every person she had ever inspired, supported, or fought for. The community rallied in disbelief, unable to reconcile the accusations with the woman they knew. Ambrose Jenkins, Margaret's son, had watched his mother lead by example all his life. Her lessons about honesty, integrity, and the importance of serving others shaped him into the man he had become. Recently appointed as district attorney, Ambrose carried his mother's teachings with him into every decision he made. "Remember, son," she would say, her voice strong but kind, "you're here to make the world better, not just for yourself, but for everyone." The charges against his mother hit Ambrose like a storm. It was both a deeply personal crisis and a professional challenge that tested his resolve. Complicating matters further was Judge Francis Lowell, a figure infamous for his severe and biased rulings, particularly against minorities. Ambrose's ongoing clash with Lowell had been a battle of principles, but now, with his mother's fate at stake, it took on an even sharper edge. The community watched closely, knowing that the outcome could not only clear Margaret's name, but expose deeper corruption and bias that had long lingered in the city's institutions. Ambrose stood at a crossroads, torn between the duty that defined his career and the loyalty that bound him to his mother. Each decision he made carried the weight of potentially reshaping justice in the city and impacting lives far beyond his own. The trial against Margaret began with unexpected swiftness, as if following a pre-written script. The courthouse, with its cold marble offset by the anxious whispers of onlookers, held an atmosphere saturated with fear and mistrust. Judge Francis Lowell, a tall man with graying temples and an unforgiving stare, who seemed incapable of empathy, made it clear from the first hearing that sympathy for the accused would not be found. His gavel struck with a force that silenced any attempts by the defense to explain the complexities of the case. Lowell was known not only for his severity, but also for his blatant disregard for cases involving minorities. His decisions were synonymous with guilty verdicts that left families shattered and lives ruined. Prosecutors and lawyers spoke cautiously, aware that any objection could provoke his anger and worsen the outcome. Sitting high on his bench, Lowell was an embodiment of unassailable power, each word he uttered echoing like nails hammered into the consciousness of the room. Margaret sat on the defendant's bench with her head held high, despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. Surrounded by lawyers and supporters from the community, who came to show their solidarity, her gaze remained steady as she listened intently to every word. She knew the battle ahead would be difficult, but believed in her innocence. Ambrose Jenkins sat in the courtroom, watching the proceedings with a heavy heart. His sharp suit and firm expression masked the emotional storm raging within. He knew that not only his mother's reputation was at stake, but also his own fight for justice as district attorney. Years of research and investigation had led him to evidence of Lowell's corruption, secret bribes, undocumented decisions, deals with businessmen. But at that moment, all Ambrose could do was watch as the judge, oblivious to who was in front of him, pressed the case against Margaret. Lowell cast a dismissive glance at the defense and spoke again, interrupting the attorney. "We don't need excessive justifications," he declared, his voice cold as steel. "This case must be resolved swiftly and effectively." Such statements underscored his bias and unwillingness to consider the defense's arguments. Ambrose felt the internal struggle between duty and personal feelings. Each strike of Lowell's gavel resonated in his heart as pain and helplessness. But he knew he had to wait for the right moment to expose the truth and show the city that not all power remains unchecked. After the harsh sentence against Margaret Jenkins was pronounced, the courtroom fell into an oppressive silence, broken only by murmurs and muted exclamations of shocked witnesses. Residents who knew Margaret as a pillar of their community were stunned. News of the injustice spread like wildfire, fueling anger and indignation among those who had seen her kindness and genuine commitment to helping others. Ambrose Jenkins, watching the trial with an impassive face, seethed with anger inside. This was the final straw, and he knew he could wait no longer. That night, he went to his office to review all the evidence and prepare a new file that would unveil Judge Francis Lowell's dark secrets. The files contained records of meetings between the judge and shadowy figures, offshore bank transfers, and proof of his ties to influential local figures involved in illegal activities, all meticulously organized into an airtight case. Ambrose sprang into action, filing official motions and revealing documents in front of witnesses to ensure their safety and the legitimacy of the process. These moves did not go unnoticed. The media picked up the story, and within days, headlines of local newspapers and broadcast news programs were booming with accusations against the judge. Corruption in the courtroom, Lowell's secret deals, and justice or farce. DA exposes judge's corruption shook the city. A public campaign began, with picket lines forming outside the courthouse. Groups of activists holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "The court should serve the people, not power," gathered to support Margaret and show that they would not stay silent. Prominent community leaders and non-profit representatives also voiced their support for Ambrose, lauding his courage and determination to pursue the truth. Television programs featured interviews with neighbors and colleagues of Margaret, who spoke of her contributions to society and her unwavering honesty. Journalists delved into the new details uncovered by Ambrose, finding corroboration in records of Lowell's biased rulings against minorities and the city's poor. One by one, people started to share stories of the injustices they faced in his court. Public opinion shifted rapidly, and the wave of discontent grew stronger. Ambrose, undeterred by pressure and threats, pressed forward. He spoke at gatherings, explaining the nature of the case and emphasizing the importance of exposing corruption at all levels. He knew the fight was only beginning, but he was ready. The public exposure of Judge Francis Lowell was the powerful climax of this difficult story. On the day the entire community gathered outside the courthouse to hear Ambrose Jenkins speak, the weather seemed to echo the solemnity of the moment. Gray clouds covered the sky, and the cool wind filled the air with anticipation. The crowd at the courthouse steps fell silent as Ambrose approached the microphone. His voice, confident and steady, cut through the silence. Today, I stand here not only as a district attorney, but as a son, a citizen, and a man who believes in truth and justice," he began, his words charged with emotion that everyone in the crowd could feel. He spoke of the sacrifices his mother, Margaret Jenkins, made for the good of the community, the unjust sentence, and how bias and corruption had destroyed lives. Ambrose detailed the evidence he had collected against Judge Lowell: secret deals, bribes funneled through offshore accounts, and statistics showing his systematically harsh rulings against vulnerable groups. The courtroom and the crowd outside held their breath as these facts were laid bare. Lowell's face, pale and tense, showed the dawning realization of his defeat. "The personal sacrifices, including those of my mother, must not be in vain," Ambrose continued, his voice faltering slightly but regaining composure quickly. "Today, we take a step toward restoring faith in the justice system so that every resident of our city can know justice is not just a word, it is a principle we are duty-bound to uphold." Following Ambrose's speech, it was announced that Lowell would be temporarily suspended from his duties. Weeks later, after a thorough investigation, he was officially found guilty of corruption and bias. During this time, Margaret's sentence was reviewed, and she was fully exonerated. Her release sparked cheers and tears of joy among her supporters, who knew that justice had finally prevailed. This case became a symbol of the fight against systemic racism and bias, transforming the city's justice system. People realized that change is possible when fought for, and Ambrose Jenkins became an emblem of courage and resilience, capable of uprooting even the deepest-seated injustices.